and welcome to this monthly live Q&A session here on the Trust Fundraising Hub with me, Beth Upton. I am the CEO of Money Tree Fundraising. We are a consultancy that specialises in both trusts and major donor fundraising, including for capital appeals along with revenue. And I come here every month and give you guys half an hour. You can ask me anything about trust fundraising you like. It's completely unscripted, and really just want to pass over to you guys. While everyone is coming on board and saying hello, I wanted to answer a question that was submitted in advance. So the question was, should you always ask a trust for the maximum grant it offers if your project costs are more than that maximum, or guess the amount they might give and ask for that instead? So I would say go for the maximum. If you have explained that your project costs, say, £100,000 and their maximum grant is £20,000, ask them for £20,000. You will probably have to, in your application, explain where the remainder is coming from anyway, so you can talk about the other applications you're submitting, other types of fundraising you're doing. But ask them, and they're grown-ups, they can give you less if they want to, but if you ask for less, they will almost never give you more. So definitely ask for the max, as long as you can demonstrate that that's definitely what you need. I would say the other thing you should be doing is, if possible, and obviously this does depend on the funder, is having a conversation with them and asking them that question, because they're all individuals. So if you've got your £100,000 project and they say 20 grand, a part of your phone call should be, obviously I can see from your chart, from your annual accounts and reports, that you tend to give £20,000 to these projects historically. Is that still true? Because bear in mind, COVID, it might not be true anymore, right? And what would you recommend would be a suitable gift level? We really do need as much as possible. So I hope that answers your question. Hi everybody. So let me scroll down. Lots of hellos, no questions yet, so that's fine. I've got one more. In fact, I've got two more. One is people keep asking me for recommendations for developing themselves as trust fundraisers, and direct trust fundraising books are probably a bit dull. But one of the books I have really loved over the years is this, Edward de Bono's 6 Thinking Hats. Now, I'll be really honest, Bill Bruty, who does excellent trust fundraising, put me onto this as his methodology. I don't know if he still does it, but when I did his training, he literally gave you the colours of paper for the 6 things, including a black piece of paper, and got you to write with that hat on that colour of paper. And I still have multicoloured bits of paper here in the office where I do exactly that. So the theory is that you can put on a different hat, and that gives you a different perspective. Edward de Bono didn't write the book with trust fundraisers in mind. A lot of it is around understanding group dynamics more generally. It can be quite useful if you're in a tricky meeting situation to try and put the hat on and work out what hat that person is wearing. But it's basically about so let me read it. Based on an understanding of how the brain chemicals change with the mode of thinking. So if we can think about things really differently, bring things from a different perspective. I think reading the book is great. I think doing a bit of a paper exercise, you don't have to have the coloured bits of paper. Maybe the different coloured pens can psychologically work as well. But physically writing your case for support or your proposal from specific angles can be really useful in sharpening your writing practice. So that is my recommendation for the day. How do I sell surveyor and architect's costs to trusts as part of a capital appeal? Well, you are struggling. Now that surprises me, Kate, because you can't build a building without an architect and a surveyor, and the trust doesn't want to invest in something that might collapse on people, does it? So very tricky if they're being awkward about it. So obviously you have your entire cost of a building when you're doing capital appeal, and it might well be that this trust is interested in funding a specific area. Maybe they want their name on something. What we did at the Marlow Theatre was we had this £25 million build, of which we were fundraising £6 million, and the rest was coming from lots of different sort of statutory sources. And so we were lucky in that if the trust wanted to fund the new lighting gantry, we were able to kind of hive out of a 25 million. We could basically pick and choose the bits that work for different funders because there was no one else competing for us. Hold on one second. I'm hoping this is a cup of tea.
No tea, I'm afraid, but have you got keys?
Yeah. Classic. My other half has locked himself out of the house. No cup of tea though. Anyway, yeah, capital costs, sorry. So I am surprised by that, but I would say you will have so many funders, Kate, that I wouldn't worry if they want to fund a thing. I mean, your fundraising costs should be in your capital appeal costs, and they might not want to fund that. But you know, if that's what works for that particular trust, don't spend too much time stressing about it. Go for it, and then just kind of find other funders who will be more broad and more generous in their thinking. I hope that helps. Jen, I'm wondering about trusts that ask which other trusts you've applied to. Is there a privacy issue here, especially when it's core funding? We apply to lots, knowing many will be unsuccessful. So they just want to know that you're not asking them alone, Jen. That's what's behind that question. There isn't a privacy issue because trusts are publicly listed on the Charity Commission, so you're not giving away any private information. And most times you won't be expected to list how much you're asking for people. It's quite normal, and I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think you just go with it. Legacy fundraising, Audrey, I'm really sorry, I don't know. I've never done, like, all the types of fundraising I've ever done, Audrey. I've never actually done legacy fundraising. I suggest you go onto Fundraising Chat, which is another group here on Facebook, I'm sure you know it, and ask someone if they've recently started, or you know, if they've started a legacy program from scratch, and if you can pick their brains. I'm sorry, I just don't know. What's the name of the book again, Julianne? Well, it's good. Edward de Bono, 6 Thinking Hats. So this, I have to tell you, I got secondhand from Abe Books, I think it was. Anyway, one of the secondhand things that isn't Amazon and therefore evil. And I think it cost me 99p and a $1.99 postage. So do look secondhand at things. There's no need to kind of spend a fortune on brand new books. Thank you for people who've already answered, Julianne. Is this session every Thursday at 12? So Julianne, this is once a month at 12:15, and it's always, whatever this is this the third Thursday of the month or something like that? So it's in a pattern so that you can pop in and join us every month. Any advice when you're fundraising for a project with very small beneficiary numbers? It's for a niche patient cohort, difficult to demonstrate enough impact. So if it's small beneficiary numbers and a niche patient cohort, you'll probably find there's only a niche number of trusts that will support you. That's the difficulty. It's probably not suitable for trusts. There are just some trusts who really do require big impact for their money. I mean, if you've done your research and you found a trust that you think it might suit, definitely I would say if it's niche, this is about when you make your phone calls and say, you know, there might only be 12 of them, but this could have a huge impact and this is why. Building relationships is how you get over that, and it's harder now than ever before to build relationships because we're all telling each other to do it suddenly, and also there's more out there. But yeah, Elspeth, thank you. Richard Radcliffe, great person for legacy fundraising. Oh, and don't worry, Audrey, I would help you with legacy fundraising if I could. I just literally don't know anything. I can't help. As a new charity working overseas, you're in India on a difficult topic over there, sexual abuse. Where do I start? Well, that's quite a big question. We already have a project and budget agreed in principle by an NGO in India. So I guess, Anita, are you a registered UK charity that is then gifted? Are you a kind of a traditional international development charity that is gifting your money out to a local NGO? Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about fundraising in India? If you could clarify for me, I'll come back to you. Any tips for monitoring and evaluating questions? Our projects aren't so good as this. So demonstrating impact can be tricky. Well, it's a bit of a big question, Emily, the whole monitoring and evaluating. It needs a bit more detail about what are you doing and why can't you get better at it? Is it that it is impossible to monitor, to measure your impact, or is it that organisationally you're not as great as you can be? They're two very different things. And I recognise that as a trust fundraiser, you can't necessarily impact your organisation very well. Like you can have some influence, but actually you need the people on the ground to be measuring the things. Also thinking laterally about different ways of measuring impact. So if asking your service delivery teams to count and measure and write down stats isn't working, is there something else you could be doing? Thanks, Anita, I'll come back to you in a second. An example that I've had to go through in the past was I was trying to demonstrate to a trust the impact individuals were having in a programme, and the truth is that the true impact wouldn't be felt for a decade or more, because it was about economic empowerment. And like, how do you say to trust, well, trust us, because in 10 years time these people will be more economically active than they would have been otherwise, and here's, you can give them all the science and the data that got you to the point of knowing that that's the model that would work, but they want to know quicker, right? So what we did was we did a quick basic survey. One of the cohort didn't speak good English, so we did it based on symbols, and it was a basic kind of slide chart of an unhappy face and a smiley face, and we did lots of different symbols for lots of different things, but we also did it using words. How do you currently measure your own competence in these 10 things that we determined to be important? How do you feel about, I don't know, we didn't say balancing your checkbook because that's a bit of a complex thing to say, but that sort of thing. So we asked them to score at the beginning of the process their own thing. We then kept those scores away from them, and then without showing them their original score at the end of the process, we got them to score the same thing again and again, the symbols and the kind of the 1 to 10 or whatever, and we were then able to turn that into a fancy kind of like a spidery chart thing. There's a special name for it, can't remember it. Someone will pop up in the chat and go, that's called the such and such method. And we were able to demonstrate that the gap, like the physical gap between, at the beginning they were in the middle because they were all in the 1s and 2s, and at the end the circle was big because they were all in the 9s and 10s. That was a visual of the difference that the programme made in the short term, and it isn't the true impact, and it also isn't the outputs, right? It's something in between. So I think it's tricky, and we need to kind of think laterally sometimes about different ways of getting people to measure. But again, I had to get the service delivery team on board with doing that at the beginning and at the end in a consistent manner, and they had to trust that we were going to aggregate the data and not give away any top secret personal data. So going back to Anita's question, you are a registered CIO here in the UK. What I would say is that your topic is more tricky in India than it is in the UK. If you look at the NSPCC, for example, they readily deal with the very difficult issue of child sexual abuse in the UK, and whilst none of us enjoy the notion that it happens, we are aware of it, and funders will fund work to challenge it. I would say that you shouldn't shy away from it, and you should just be dealing with it openly and honestly. It's a really big topic, sexual abuse over there. You've got the answer to how to solve it, and you just need to go ahead and do it. You just need to think about, it's no different to telling a trust that is interested in solving world hunger that you found a solution to providing water to everybody. It's the same thing. You've got to do your research, go to the right trust, probably build a relationship, and move on from there. I hope that helps a bit. What are my thoughts on the trust fundraising landscape going into the new financial year, advice of pipelines and trust planning? So it's interesting, isn't it, Emily? So everything appears to be getting back to normal. The kind of, what I mean by that from a trust point of view is the COVID funds seem to be closing up shop, and certainly from a capital appeal point of view, things seem to be opening up that have been closed for a 12-month view while they dealt with the immediate emergency. And I think also there is a sense that the emergency is over. We're now in a long-term chronic condition rather than a short-term urgent condition, and therefore the charities are picking stuff up, and that can be dealt with through normal trust funds rather than having to have COVID emergency response funds. That's my sense. What we won't know, and this is the caution when you're doing your planning, is what has been the financial impact on those trusts by responding to the emergency. And we actually, unless they're honest and open and say, do you know what, we spent a load of our endowment, so we're going to give smaller grants this year, sorry folks. Unless they're upfront and tell us, which they inevitably won't, we won't know the financial impact probably for another 12 months or so, because we will only find out the financial impact when they're submitting their accounts for what has happened, and we can see in the accounts how much of their endowment got spent down compared to normal. The other factor, of course, is the recession, and also, I am going to use the word, so steel yourself people, Brexit, and the economics of that. What the average trust gives grants based on the income it earns from the stock market. And if the stock market isn't doing that well, it literally hasn't got the income to give away. If on top of that you layer in that they spent a load of that normal investment, they've got to make a choice as to whether they're okay being a smaller fund that will always earn less money even in the good times, or if they want to take some of their earnings and replenish their stocks. And those are choices that trusts will make differently according to their trusts. Obviously, there are exceptions. You look at Gulfield Western, for example, their income comes from the businesses that the Western family own, and that includes some really good food companies, and they've been very buoyant during the last period. But it does also include Primark, which hasn't exactly been thriving through lockdown. So there are different models, and the truth is we won't know. If I was writing a budget this year, I certainly wouldn't anticipate any growth. I would look at business as usual with a huge health warning that we didn't see this coming, right? This time last year when we were doing our budgets, people were talking about COVID, but no one was expecting that we would go into a massive, basically whole year's worth of lockdown, and that as a result people would be in urgent need, and therefore trusts would completely change their giving criteria. So I think that organisationally the message has got to be, best guess is business as usual, and I mean a pre-COVID business as usual. So if you were bringing in 200 grand before COVID, you've done better or worse this year because of the emergency funds. Best case scenario is that you're going to bring in 200 grand again, assuming you've got the projects, assuming the work is there. You've got to have that pipeline at the other end, and they are also affected by COVID because you're not getting your boots on the ground, you're not able to join together as groups depending on your cause. It is harder to deliver your service, and therefore there may be less appetite to fund your work from trust. So it's a bit complex. Those are all the things you should be thinking about. And wow, am I grateful I don't have to set a budget this year. Great to know the name of the spider chart. Lizzie, if I can remember the name of this chart, I will post it later. There's no way I'm gonna remember it right now. It's totally gone, but I'll make sure I post on the group later what that kind of spidery thing is called. Yeah, Kelsey, completely agree. Trusts who have got investments in properties are seeing a huge dip in income, because if you think there's an awful, we think property income in this country, and we think about our own domestic situations mainly, and we think about the fact that we either own property or we're landlords or we're tenants, right? So when you think property, that's the common sense approach. But actually the vast majority of property wealth in this country is business asset wealth. You think about the dearth of activity in city centres. I keep hearing people who live in London telling me how nice it is they can go for a walk through the city in the middle of the week because there's literally nobody there. So you've got businesses that are not paying their rent. That's the sort of immediate impact. You've got the support businesses. So if you've got a finance company sat in a building, it's not paying its rent, or it's negotiated a lower rent, and then you've got on the ground floor all those kind of high street chain cafes and things. They're closed. A lot of them have closed and gone bust, so they're definitely not paying their rent, but they've also negotiated rent relief, right, because they're not earning any money. And then those businesses are based on an arbitrary valuation of their property portfolio, and anyone valuing a business property portfolio right now is going to value it because there's not the income, right? That's how you value a portfolio, is what income can it derive you. And nobody has the answer to how we're going to repurpose our city centres. I mean, I do, if you're interested. I think we make it all bloody housing. But, you know, they're not interested in that because it doesn't create the same yields, and it does have huge economic impact as a nation. There's an awful lot of our nation's wealth, and let's be honest, there's not as much wealth now since Brexit as there was. But a lot of our nation's wealth is predicated on property value, both personally and on a professional level. So me flippantly going, turn it into housing, it'll be fine, is actually a huge economic problem for us as a nation, which luckily is for people in government to worry about, not me. I can just come up with brilliant ideas. The trust world is tricky, I guess is what I'm saying, and there's no easy answers. There was another question came through about making calls to trusts that I wanted to just talk about for a minute. So I always tell people to call a trust if they can and try and build rapport. And I firmly believe that that is the right answer. I firmly believe that the reason I have been a successful trust fundraiser over the years is that I have swallowed my beating heart and been nervous and said, hello, I'm calling from such and such charity. I'm thinking of submitting an application. Would it be possible to arrange a time to chat, or is now a good moment to have a conversation, please? Now, I absolutely readily accept that when I started being a trust fundraiser in, I don't know, 2005 maybe, the world was different. There was a wider variety of trusts and grants available because there was government granting. There was a smaller number of charities fishing in that pool, and that the world has changed out of all recognition, particularly in the last 12 months, but also huge change over the last decade. I still firmly believe it's the right answer, and it's nerve-wracking. Literally, I still remember the feeling of my heart being up here as I picked up the phone. And what I recommend is that you sit down and you work out what would it actually. You can't just have a phone call and say, I thought I'd built some rapport. You know, you've got to have something useful to say, and it's got to be something that you can't Google and find. So you can't phone and say, I thought I'd ask what your guidelines are. If they've got a perfectly serviceable website with the guidelines, that would just annoy them. So you've got to come up with a question that is better than that. And one of them is it possible I could talk through the nuance of this part of my project? I can see that it fits, but I want to check with you whether it fits in your priorities right now. Or going back to that first question of how much should you ask for, that's a really good question. You know, I recognise that historically you've given £20,000 grants for projects such as mine. I'm also aware of COVID and it's had a huge impact. I want to check, would I be better off asking for a different sum? That's the kind of questions you could ask. Write it down and go somewhere privately and practice a one-sided conversation. Literally say it out loud. Read your script. If you don't read your script, what will happen is you will glance down on the phone and there'll be something you've written wrong, and it will trip you up. You won't have written it how you speak it, and it won't help, and that will just unnerve you and make you stutter and stammer. Now, that isn't going to make you be judged harshly at the other side. As long as you've still got a coherent question, it'll be fine, but it'll make you feel worse and it will add to your stress, and there's no need to make your job stressful. So practice, literally go in a room and go, hi, I'm calling from the so-and-so charity. I wondered if now would be a good time to speak to someone about this part of my application, please. Oh, it's not a good time. Is it possible to make an appointment for a good time, please? So think through what are the options. Always be polite enough to ask someone if it's a good time. You know, that's just basic manners. They're not there at your beck and call as much as we would like them to be. But, you know, ask them and that kind of thing. So it comes up a lot, the asking if you can phone someone question, and I just wanted to kind of address it. The rule I always used to have was, if they have published a phone number on the Charity Commission website, which is optional, they're probably open for questions. If they haven't, then they're probably not. That's kind of, but you know, equally they may have published an email address, and you could email and say, I've got some questions, would that be okay? Ideally it would be by phone call, or would you prefer if I submit them here? You know, but ask people if it's okay first, and just get on with it, really. There are no more questions forthcoming. We've got 5 more minutes left. I'm just making sure as best I can that I've answered all of the questions. I think I have, and I've answered the questions that had come in before. That's great. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to do my kind of monthly beating the drum about resilience and taking care of yourselves. Trust fundraisers have worked more hard in the last 12 months than they have ever before. Trust fundraisers have single-handedly kept some organisations going thanks to the generosity of trusts and foundations who have really stepped up in this crisis, because let's be honest, the government hasn't. Some of you have been furloughed and had your jobs passed over to others, and you're now back and you're working out where it's all got to. Some of you have worked absolutely solidly while the rest of your team got furloughed, and you've barely taken a day off. We all care about the causes we work for. If we didn't, we would work in the private sector, earn more money and work fewer hours. It's as simple as that. And your passion is admirable and to be rewarded, and is the thing we all have in common. But your passion mustn't turn into something that drives you to work too hard. Your organisation will readily accept your extra hours and be grateful for it. Some organisations might even proactively ask you to do it, but I would ask of you to consider your own boundaries and consider your own mental health, and think through that we are past the immediate crisis point, and you need to think about what is a reasonable workload for you as a person and take charge of that. I think it's more important now that we're all at home and isolated, even if we've got a super supportive manager, that manager isn't there going, oh God, that's the third, fourth night in a row he or she has sat at their desk a bit too long, I need to tackle that. They're not going to admit it, but I need to work out what's going on there. So I would implore you to think through your workload, think through what is realistic and reasonable. Obviously work hard on the hours you're paid to work, that goes without saying, right? But we all do that, and I know that everybody who's taken the time to listen to me today is working extra hours, because we all do, and we all have done. I'm not saying you should work to rule, I'm not saying you shouldn't work extra hours, I'm saying that you need to find a balance that is not going to be an emergency situation for you. You can only run on adrenaline for so long. If you haven't had a decent break, I know there's no way you can go out. I know we can't go out. Still consider taking some time off and finding something to do at home that gives you rest and recuperation, so that you can come back to your organisation and be the best version of yourself, because that is what they need, is long-term support, not an awesome person who's going to give it their all for 18 months and then bugger off with burnout. They might not know that. It might be for you to just lead them to that understanding, and that's what I would leave you with as I say goodbye today, is take care of yourselves. You do an amazing job. We are here to help where we can, and I'll be here next month. But in the meantime, take care of yourself and seek the help you need. And I hope this has been really useful. And thank you all for watching.